The call for a missing child usually sent a jolt of ice through any first responder's veins. But for Marine veteran Alicia Rowe, it was a ghost she had learned to live with. She and her German shepherd, Bear, were a team, a quiet force known throughout the county for finding what was lost, whether it was a hiker who had wandered off trail or a dementia patient who had slipped away from home. But this case was different. This time, the search would lead them into the dark, forgotten spaces beneath their sleepy town, into a storm drain where a terrified little girl was found clinging to a set of old, worn dog tags. For Alicia, the discovery wouldn't just be the end of a search. It would be the explosive beginning of a journey into a past she thought was long buried. Because the name stamped on that small piece of metal was a name she knew better than her own, the name of a brother lost to war a decade ago. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Alicia Rowe lived her life in a carefully constructed state of quiet. Her small house was tucked away at the end of a long gravel road, flanked by the dense, silent pines of the Wenatchee National Forest. It was a world away from the dust and chaos of Fallujah, a world away from the rigid structure of the Marine Corps. Her only constant companion was Bear, a magnificent German shepherd whose sable coat and intelligent amber eyes mirrored a deep and steady soul. He wasn't just her dog, he was her anchor. His quiet breathing in the night was the only thing that could chase away the memories that lingered like phantom limbs, the ghosts of a life she had survived but never truly left behind. She had been a dog handler in the Marines, working with IED detection dogs, a high-stakes job where every step was a gamble. Bear was the son of her last military canine, a hero dog named Odin who had saved her life twice before being lost in a firefight. In Bear, Alicia saw the same fierce loyalty, the same unwavering spirit. He was her living connection to a past filled with both pride and a pain so deep it had no words. The deepest of those pains was the loss of her older brother David. He was Army, a fact that had fueled a lifetime of good-natured sibling rivalry. He'd been the steady, protective one, she, the fiery, reckless one. He had enlisted first, and she, in a fit of competitive spirit, had joined the Marines, determined to outdo him. Their last conversation had been a hurried, crackling satellite call. He was in some remote forward operating base in Afghanistan. She was prepping for a deployment to Iraq. They had argued about something stupid, something about who had the tougher drill instructors. Her last words to him had been a flippant, "Try not to get lost out there, Army strong." 6 weeks later, 2 uniformed officers had arrived at her parents' door. Sergeant David J. Rowe was officially listed as lost in a non-combat incident. His body never recovered from the rugged, unforgiving mountains of the Hindu Kush. The story was vague, full of redacted reports and bureaucratic condolences. It felt wrong, incomplete, a wound that could never properly scar over because the truth of it was missing. For 10 years, that hollow space had been a part of Alicia, a quiet hum of unresolved grief beneath the surface of her new, peaceful life. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon, as a dark wall of storm clouds gathered over the mountains. It was Sheriff Brody, a good man with a perpetually worried face, who ran the small county sheriff's department. "Alicia, it's Brody. We've got a bad one," he said, his voice tight with an urgency that cut through the phone line. A 6-year-old girl, Lily Patterson, wandered away from her backyard an hour ago. "We're searching the neighborhood, but this storm, it's going to hit hard. The family is frantic. I know you don't usually do these anymore, but you and Bear are the best we've got." Alicia felt the familiar, unwelcome clenching in her gut. A child. High-stakes, high-emotion searches were something she had tried to step away from. They hit too close to home, stirring up the silt of her own losses. But she looked over at Bear, who was watching her, his head cocked, his intelligent eyes already understanding. He was born and bred for this work. It was a betrayal of his very nature, and her own, to say no. "We're on our way," she said, her voice more resolute than she felt. The scene at the Patterson house was organized chaos. Volunteers in bright rain gear huddled with deputies, poring over maps under the darkening sky. The air was thick with the scent of coming rain, and a palpable, collective fear. Lily's parents were ghosts of themselves, their faces pale and etched with a terror Alicia knew all too well. She spent only a moment with them, long enough to get a piece of Lily's clothing for Bear to get a scent from, a small pink sweater that still smelled of bubble gum and childhood. "She's afraid of loud noises," Mrs. Patterson said, her voice a raw whisper. "The thunder, she'll be so scared." Alicia's own heart ached with a painful empathy. "We'll find her," she promised, a vow she wasn't sure she could keep. She and Bear started their search away from the main group, working in the methodical, grid-like pattern she had learned in the military. Bear was all business now, his body low to the ground, his nose working tirelessly, deciphering the invisible story of the world. The first drops of rain began to fall, cold and fat, splattering against the pavement. The wind picked up, rustling the pines with a sound like a mournful sigh. As they worked, Alicia's thoughts drifted, as they often did during searches, to David. He had loved storms. As kids, they would sit on their porch and watch the lightning crack open the sky, he with a quiet awe, she with a restless energy. He was the calm in her personal storm. The official report said he had been lost during a sudden blizzard in the mountains. The irony was not lost on her. A boy who loved storms, consumed by one. The story felt too neat, too poetic for the messy reality of war. They cleared the neighborhood, the local park, the woods bordering the houses. Nothing. The rain was falling harder now, turning the ground to mud. The search teams were being hampered, their efforts slowed by the worsening conditions. Sheriff Brody's voice crackled over the radio, the worry escalating. "The storm drains. The creeks are rising fast. We need to check all the drainage culverts." That's when Bear changed. He lifted his head, his ears perked, and let out a single, low whine. He pulled hard on his lead, away from the direction the other teams were heading, towards a desolate stretch of overgrown land, behind an old, abandoned commercial building. "What is it, boy?" Alicia murmured, her hand on his back. "What do you have?" Bear didn't hesitate. He led her through a tangle of weeds and discarded junk to a large, concrete storm drain, mostly obscured by overgrown bushes. The opening was a black, uninviting mouth, smelling of damp earth and decay. A place a small child might crawl into to escape the terrifying sound of thunder. Alicia felt a prickle of unease. She had a deep-seated dislike of enclosed, dark spaces, a parting gift from a tour in Iraq where she'd had to clear tight, underground tunnels for explosives. She took a deep breath, pushing the feeling down. Her job was to follow the dog. She pulled a powerful flashlight from her pack and clicked it on. "All right, Bear. Show me." Bear squeezed into the tunnel, and Alicia followed, her boots splashing in the shallow, muddy water. The concrete pipe was cold and narrow, the beam of her flashlight cutting a lonely path through the oppressive darkness. The sound of the rain outside was a dull roar. They moved forward 50 feet, then 100. It was a maze of intersecting pipes. And then Bear stopped, whining softly, his body blocking the way forward. Alicia squeezed past him, shining her light into a small side alcove, and there she was. A small figure, huddled into a tight ball, her face buried in her knees. It was Lily, her pink jacket soaked and muddy, her small body trembling. "Lily?" Alicia said softly, her voice echoing in the confined space. "It's okay. We're here to take you home." The little girl didn't look up, but she whimpered, a sound of pure terror. "My name is Alicia, and this is Bear," she continued, keeping her voice low and calm. "He's a very good boy. He found you." Bear, sensing the child's fear, crept forward and gently licked her hand. The little girl flinched, then slowly, hesitantly, raised her head. Her face was streaked with dirt and tears, her eyes wide and dark in the flashlight's beam. But it wasn't her face that made Alicia's heart stop. It was what she was clutching in her small white-knuckled fist, holding it to her chest like a shield. It was a set of military dog tags on a tarnished silver chain. "Honey, what do you have there?" Alicia asked, her own voice suddenly feeling distant, unreal. Lily looked down at her fist, then back at Alicia. She seemed to believe the metal tags held some protective power. "The soldier man said it would keep me safe," she whispered, her voice barely audible. he said to hide from the storm. A soldier man. Alicia's mind raced. A transient? A local veteran having a psychotic episode? Can I see it, Lily? Alicia asked, her voice gentle, masking the sudden cold dread that was spreading through her. I was a soldier too. I'll keep it safe for you. Slowly, as if relinquishing her only hope, Lily uncurled her fingers and held out the dog tags. Alicia took them, the metal cold against her skin. She angled them into the beam of her flashlight, her heart pounding a heavy, suffocating rhythm against her ribs. The stamped letters were worn but clear. Rowe. David J. P.O.S. A+ Catholic. The world tilted and went silent. The roaring of the storm, the dripping of the water, the pounding of her own heart, it all faded away into a vacuum. It couldn't be. It was impossible. A hallucination brought on by stress and grief. But the metal was solid and real in her hand. These were her brother's dog tags. Her brother, who had been lost 10,000 miles away, a decade ago. His memory, his ghost, was here, in this dark, wet tunnel in the hand of a lost child. She knelt there in the darkness, the flashlight beam trembling, the impossible truth lying cold and heavy in her palm. The search for Lily Patterson was over. But for Alicia Rowe, a new, far more dangerous search had just begun. The journey out of the storm drain was a blur. Alicia moved on autopilot, her mind a maelstrom of shock and disbelief. She wrapped Lily in an emergency blanket, lifted the small, trembling girl into her arms, and carried her out into the lashing rain, with Bear leading the way. The dog tags were a burning weight in her pocket. The scene at the command post was one of pure, unadulterated relief. The moment Lily's parents saw her, they broke down, their cries of joy and gratitude echoing through the storm. Paramedics checked Lily over, pronouncing her cold and scared, but otherwise unharmed. Sheriff Brody clapped Alicia on the shoulder, his face shining with relief. I knew you could do it, Alicia. I knew it. You and that dog are miracles. Alicia just nodded, unable to form words. She didn't mention the dog tags. She couldn't. How could she explain the inexplicable? To voice the impossible reality of what she'd found would be to invite a storm of questions she had no way of answering. It would make her sound crazy. For now, the dog tags were her secret, a sacred and terrifying mystery she had to unravel alone. She spent the next day in a fog, the dog tags sitting on her kitchen table, a tangible link to a past that had suddenly crashed into her present. She ran her thumb over the worn letters of David's name, remembering the day he'd gotten them, so proud in his new uniform. He'd let her hold them, and she'd joked that they made him official government property. He had just laughed. It just means I'll always find my way home, Mally, he had said. But he hadn't come home. And now, 10 years later, his dog tags had. How? Lily Patterson was the only link. After a day of rest, the little girl was physically fine, but emotionally, she was withdrawn, speaking only in whispers. Her parents told Sheriff Brody that she kept asking for the dog lady and the big dog. Reluctantly, Brody called Alicia. I know it's a lot to ask, he said, but you're the only one she seems to have connected with. We need to know what happened, who this soldier man is. The family is worried there's a dangerous person living in the woods. Alicia agreed immediately. With Bear trotting calmly by her side, she went to the Patterson house. The change in Lily was immediate. The moment she saw Bear, a small, fragile smile touched her lips. She slid off the couch and wrapped her arms around the big dog's neck, burying her face in his thick fur. Alicia sat on the floor with her, not pushing, just creating a space of quiet safety. After a while, Lily began to talk, her story emerging in disconnected fragments, filtered through the lens of a 6-year-old's memory. I was chasing a butterfly, she whispered, her hand stroking Bear's ear. I went into the woods. It got dark. The sky started to get angry. She described being lost as the thunder began to clap. And then she described the man. He was hiding, like a game. He had a beard, all scratchy. His clothes were old. He looked sad. Was he mean to you? Alicia asked gently. Lily shook her head emphatically. No. He was nice. He gave me a candy bar. He said the storm was coming and I had to hide. He showed me the pipe. He said it was a good hiding spot. She looked down at her hands. He gave me his shiny necklace. He said it was magic. He said it would keep me safe until someone found me. He said to give it to someone with a good dog. Give it to someone with a good dog. The words sent a shiver down Alicia's spine. It was too specific to be a coincidence. But how could this man, this sad hiding man, know about her and Bear? Over the next few days, Alicia worked with Lily and a child psychologist. Lily drew pictures. They were childish scribbles, but the details were there. A tall, thin man with a beard, leaning on a stick. A small, makeshift shelter made of branches. And in every picture, the man was surrounded by trees, always watching from a distance. The dog tags were a burning question that Alicia couldn't ignore. She knew she couldn't go through official channels. If David's death was part of a cover-up, a formal inquiry would just hit a wall of redacted files. She needed to talk to someone who operated outside the official lines, someone she could trust. She made a call she hadn't made in years, to a man named Jack Reardon, a former master gunnery sergeant who had been her mentor in the Marines. He had retired and now worked as a private investigator, specializing in finding people who didn't want to be found. "Alicia Rowe?" Jack's gravelly voice came over the line. "Now that's a name I haven't heard in a long time. I assume you're not calling to catch up on old times." Alicia told him the story, her voice low and steady as she relayed the impossible facts. Jack was silent for a long time after she finished. "Davy's tags," he finally said, his voice softer. "Hell, kid. Are you sure they're real?" "I'm sure, Gunny," she replied. "I know them like I know my own name." "A non-combat incident in the Hindu Kush, body never recovered," Jack mused. That always smelled wrong. Those incidents are usually a cover for one of two things: a blue-on-blue friendly fire situation, or a clandestine op that went sideways. Giving your brother's unit, I bet on the latter. He agreed to help, to pull on old strings from his time in intelligence. "Don't expect miracles, Allie. That file is probably buried under a mountain of black ink. But I'll see what I can shake loose. In the meantime, you be careful. If this is what I think it is, you're not just digging up a memory. You're digging up a secret someone wanted buried for good." His words proved prophetic. A week later, Alicia was running errands in town when she noticed a man watching her from across the street. He was nondescript, in his late 40s, with a tired face and a posture that was too self-contained for a civilian. He wasn't overtly threatening, but he was observing her with a professional stillness that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. She saw him again the next day, parked in a plain sedan near the entrance to her road. He wasn't Scylla. He was a different kind of hunter, the kind the government sends to keep its secrets quiet. That night, Jack called her back. His voice was grim. "I hit a wall," he said. "A hard one. David's file is locked down with a code word clearance I haven't seen since my time in covert ops. It's a ghost file. Allie, it officially doesn't exist. But I got a whisper from an old friend at the Pentagon. The official story is a lie. There was an operation, codenamed Silent Arrow, a small team sent to assassinate a high-level warlord. The mission was betrayed. They were ambushed. The official report says the whole team was wiped out. But Lily's soldier man," Alicia said, her mind racing. "If he was David, then the report was wrong," Jack finished. "Or it was a lie. Someone might have survived. Allie, you need to be damn careful. Whoever this man in the woods is, he's connected to something very dangerous. And by finding those tags, you just painted a target on your own back." The warning came too late. The next evening, as dusk was settling over the forest, the nondescript man from town walked up her driveway. He didn't knock. He just stood there, waiting for her to come out, his hands in his pockets. He looked less like a threat, and more like a man bearing a heavy burden. Alicia came out onto her porch, with Bear standing silently, protectively, by her side. "You're Alicia Rowe," the man said. It wasn't a question. "My name is Marcus Cole. I think you and I need to have a conversation about your brother." The name Marcus Cole meant nothing to her, but the look in his eyes told her everything. He was part of the secret. He was the keeper of the ghost file. He knew what had really happened to David on that mountain, and he was here to make sure the ghosts stayed buried. The quiet life Alicia had so carefully constructed was now officially over, and the truth, she suspected, was going to be more painful than 10 years of not knowing. The air on the porch was thick with unspoken history. Marcus Cole looked like a man who hadn't had a peaceful night's sleep in a decade. His eyes were shadowed with a weariness that went beyond simple fatigue. It was the exhaustion of a man who had carried a heavy secret for too long. "Who are you?" Alicia asked, her voice steady, betraying none of the turmoil inside her. Bear remained at her side, a low, almost inaudible growl rumbling in his chest. He sensed this man was not a simple visitor. "I was with the agency," Cole said, his voice quiet. "I was a case officer. I was responsible for the operational planning of Silent Arrow." The code name hung in the cool evening air, a phantom made real. This man wasn't just a keeper of the secret. He was one of its architects. "My brother's file says he died in a non-combat incident," Alicia stated, her words a challenge, a test. Cole gave a short, bitter laugh that held no humor. "The file says what it was designed to say. It's a work of fiction. Your brother, Sergeant David Rowe, was one of the bravest men I ever had the privilege of knowing. And his team wasn't lost to a blizzard. They were betrayed." He proceeded to tell her the real story, his voice a flat monotone, as if recounting a painful memory he had replayed 1,000 times. Operation Silent Arrow was an off-the-books mission to eliminate a powerful warlord who was secretly funding attacks on coalition forces while publicly posturing as an ally. David's team was inserted to carry out the mission, relying on intelligence from a local asset, but the asset was a double agent. He led them directly into a kill box, an ambush set by the warlord's elite guard. "It was a slaughter," Cole said, his gaze distant, lost in the memory. "The team was outnumbered 10-1. They fought like lions, but they were overwhelmed. We were monitoring the satellite feed from a drone. We saw them go down, one by one. But David survived," Alicia whispered, the Vidas, words catching in her throat. Cole nodded slowly. "He did. He was wounded, badly, but he managed to evade capture. He was the only one. But he wasn't just a survivor. He was a witness. He had overheard the warlord talking to our supposed asset. He knew the betrayal wasn't just on a local level. Had information implicating high-ranking officials in the Afghan government we were propping up. If that information had gotten out, it would have shattered the coalition and destabilized the entire war effort." The cold, cynical logic of the cover-up fell into place. David was not a hero to be welcomed home. He was a liability to be managed. "So you buried him," Alicia said, the bitterness rising in her voice. "You declared him dead to protect a political situation." "We saved his life," Cole countered, a flicker of defensiveness in his eyes. "The warlord's men were hunting him. The Allied government we couldn't afford to expose wanted him silenced. If we had brought him home officially, he would have been debriefed and then buried in some windowless room for the rest of his life to protect the secret. Or worse, an accident would have been arranged. So we gave him another option, a third option." He described how a covert team had extracted the wounded David and smuggled him out of Afghanistan. They brought him back to the States, erased his identity, and set him up with a new one. They gave him a choice: disappear completely and live out his life in quiet isolation, or face the consequences of the knowledge he carried. "He chose to disappear," Cole continued. "We set him up in a cabin deep in the national forest, not 20 miles from here. He chose this area. He said he wanted to be close to the mountains he grew up with, close to where you were. It was his only request. My job, for the last 10 years, has been to be his handler, his ghost. I was his only point of contact with the outside world. I brought him supplies, news, kept him safe." A wave of nausea washed over Alicia. Her brother had been alive. For 10 years, he had been living just over the ridge, a prisoner of his own survival, while she mourned a ghost. The sad, bearded man Lily had described was her brother. "Was?" Alicia asked, seizing on the past tense of Cole's words. "Where is he now, Cole? Where is my brother?" Cole's weary face seemed to crumple. "That's why I'm here. David. He died 3 weeks ago. The old wounds, they never fully healed. There were complications, an infection. I found him in his cabin. He was at peace." He paused, his voice thick with emotion. Before he passed, he must have known the end was near. He'd become more withdrawn, started wandering further from the cabin. He must have seen the little girl, Lily, and in a final act of a desire to connect, to send a message, he gave her his dog tags. He must have known that in this small county, a piece of military hardware found in the hands of a missing child would eventually find its way to you, the local SAR vet. It was his last, desperate attempt to find his way home. The story was complete. A truth more painful and complex than she could ever have imagined. The grief she felt was immense, a fresh, raw agony for the brother she had lost not once, but twice. But beneath the grief, there was also a flicker of understanding. David had not abandoned her. He had protected her, in the honor of his government, in the only way he could. "Take me to him," she said, her voice a raw command. "Take me to my brother's home." The cabin was nestled in a clearing so deep in the forest it felt like a forgotten world. It was small and rustic, but well kept. Inside, it was Spartan, but organized. There was a small cot, a table, and shelves filled with books, many on history and philosophy. On the table was a worn leather journal. With trembling hands, Alicia opened it. It was David's handwriting. The journal spanned 10 years. It was filled with his thoughts, his loneliness, his struggle to reconcile his survival with the loss of his team. He wrote of his guilt, his anger at the betrayal, but also of moments of peace he found in the forest. He wrote about her. He had followed her career from a distance, through news clippings and articles Cole would bring him. He wrote of his pride in her service, in the SAR work she was doing. He called her his North Star, the one good, true thing he could hold on to. In the final entry, dated a week before his death, his handwriting was weak, shaky. "The pain is bad now. I don't think I have much time. I saw a little girl in the woods today. She looked lost. She had bright eyes, like Allie's when she was little. I gave her my tags. A silly gesture, maybe. But the chain is broken. It's time for this soldier to finally come home. Tell Allie I'm sorry. Tell her I love her." Tears streamed down Alicia's face as she clutched the journal to her chest. It was a final letter, a goodbye from a brother she thought she'd never hear from again. She and Cole buried David on a hill overlooking the valley, under a tall pine tree, a place where he could watch the storms roll in. There was no flag, no honor guard, just a sister saying goodbye to her brother. She had found the truth. It was ugly and heartbreaking, but it was the truth. It filled the hollow space inside her, not with joy, but with a profound and aching sense of peace. The official story of Sergeant David J. Rowe never changed. But for Alicia, everything changed. The grief was no longer a hollow ache, but a living memory, a legacy to be honored. She went back to her SAR work with a renewed sense of purpose. The dog tags her brother had worn were now joined with her own, hanging from the same chain around her neck. She formally established the Rowe Rescue Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to wilderness search and rescue, and to providing trained canine companions to veterans suffering from trauma. Her work with Bear became her mission, a way to honor David's memory by bringing others home. A year later, a new memorial was dedicated in the town square, a simple granite obelisk honoring the county's sons and daughters who had served in the armed forces. Alicia stood in the crowd, with Bear at her side. Lily Patterson and her parents were there. The little girl, no longer haunted by her ordeal, ran up and threw her arms around Bear's neck. Alicia watched them. Then her eyes found the name newly carved on the memorial. Sarge Sher David J. Rowe. His story was no longer a secret buried in a classified file. He was home. He was remembered. She reached up and touched the 2 sets of dog tags beneath her shirt. They were a reminder of 2 lives, 2 paths of service, one lost and one found. They were a symbol of a promise kept, of a brother's last wish fulfilled, and of a sister who had walked through the darkness of the past to find her own purpose in the light of the present. The storm was over. She was finally at peace. The quiet that Alicia Rowe cultivated was a living thing, a bulwark she actively maintained against the persistent siege of memory. Her mornings at the edge of the Wenatchee National Forest were a ritual of silence and discipline. Before the sun crested the eastern ridges, she and Bear would be out on the trails, moving with a synchronized fluid grace. She didn't just walk. She patrolled, her senses alive, cataloging the scent of pine and damp earth, the snap of a distant twig, the pattern of the light through the canopy. It was the same hyper-awareness that had kept her alive in the dusty, treacherous alleys of Fallujah, now repurposed for peace. Her training sessions with Bear were a testament to this ingrained precision. They weren't the playful fetch-and-reward games of a civilian pet owner. They were drills. She would run complex scent trails, hide objects with the faintest human trace, and command Bear with a vocabulary of hand signals and low single-word commands. He would respond with an intensity that was breathtaking, a perfect fusion of instinct and training. In these moments, she wasn't just a dog owner, she was a handler, and he wasn't just a dog, he was her partner. This rigorous routine was her meditation, a way to channel the restless energy of a former Marine into a constructive, ordered present. But the quiet was always fragile, susceptible to the ghosts of the past. The ghost of her brother, David, was the most persistent. She remembered their last day together, not the hurried, angry phone call, but the week before, when he was on pre-deployment leave. They had gone fishing at Lake Chelan, a family tradition. The rivalry between Army and Marines was in full force. "You know," David had said, casting his line into the deep blue water, "the Army teaches you to be a strategic thinker. We're playing chess while you Marines are still playing checkers." "Asti, funny," Alicia had shot back, baiting, quote, her hook. "Checkers is a lot more useful when you need to take a city block by block. We don't have time for your strategic naps." He had laughed, a deep, easy sound that echoed off the water. The teasing faded, and a comfortable silence settled between them. "You be safe over there, Allie," he said, his voice suddenly serious. "No unnecessary heroics. Your job is to come home." "You too, Davy," she'd replied. "Promise me. We both come home." He had looked out at the vast, serene lake. "Promise," he'd said. The memory was so vivid she could almost smell the lake water and the pine needles. It was a promise broken by a vague, clinical report of a non-combat incident and a blizzard in a country she couldn't find on a map without a magnifying glass. The two Army officers who delivered the news had been polite, stoic, and utterly unhelpful. They spoke of duty and sacrifice, but their eyes were empty of any real information. Her parents had crumbled, their grief a raw, physical force in the room. Alicia had just felt a cold, hollow numbness. It was the first secret she had ever known, the feeling that the official story was a lie, a carefully constructed wall she would never be able to see behind. So when Sheriff Brody's call came about Lily Patterson, it was a summons to a world she understood all too well, the world of the lost. His plea was more than just a request for help. "Alicia, you remember that hiker last year?" Brody said, his voice strained. "The one who fell into the ravine up on Kolchak Peak? We had helicopters, 50 volunteers. We searched for 2 days and found nothing. You and Bear went in. And you found him in 3 hours. He was hypothermic, barely alive, but he lived. I don't know what you do, or how that dog does what he does, but if anyone can find this little girl before this storm turns our world to mud, it's you." The memory of that rescue, of the man's grateful, tear-filled eyes, was a powerful counterpoint to her reluctance. It was a reminder that her skills, forged in war, could have a different purpose here, a purpose of restoration rather than destruction. She looked at Bear, who was already by the door, his leash in his mouth, his tail giving a single, expectant thump against the floor. The decision was never really hers to make. It was theirs. The search for Lily Patterson began under a sky the color of a fresh bruise. The air, thick and humid, clung to Alicia's skin. As she guided Bear, letting him work descent from Lily's pink sweater, She observed the other search teams. They were a chaotic mix of well-meaning neighbors and grim-faced deputies, their movements overlapping, their voices carrying on the rising wind. They were searching with their emotions, with a frantic energy that was counterproductive. Alicia and Bear worked in silence, a bubble of calm focus in the growing storm. With every dead end, every trail that went cold, Alicia felt a familiar frustration rise in her chest. It was the same feeling she'd had a decade ago when she had tried to get answers about David. She had called his commanding officer, written letters to her congressman, filed Freedom of Information Act requests. The responses were always the same: polite, formulaic condolences, and files that were either heavily redacted or mysteriously lost in bureaucratic shuffles. Every closed door in her present search for Lily mirrored a closed door from her past, a constant painful echo. When Bear led her to the storm drain, the feeling of unease was visceral. The black maw of the tunnel seemed to exhale a cold, damp breath. Her own ghosts stirred. She remembered a tunnel-clearing operation outside Ramadi, the suffocating darkness, the smell of stale air and fear, the constant threat of a hidden explosive device underfoot. She had to force herself to take the first step into the pipe, her hand resting on Bear's back, drawing strength from his unwavering courage. The darkness inside was absolute, broken only by the narrow, bouncing beam of her flashlight. The sound was a symphony of claustrophobia, the drip, drip, drip of water from unseen cracks, the gurgle of the rising stream at their feet, the dull, thunderous roar of the storm raging above them, a sound that felt like the earth itself was groaning. She could hear her own breathing, loud and ragged in her ears. When they found Lily, the initial relief was so overwhelming, it almost brought Alicia to her knees. The little girl was alive. That was all that mattered. But then came the dog tags. The conversation with the terrified child was a delicate dance of patience and trust. Alicia didn't press her. She just sat in the cold mud, letting Bear nudge the girl's hand, a furry, warm ambassador of safety. The soldier man. He was very tall, Lily whispered after a long silence, her voice a tiny thread of sound. Taller than my daddy. He had kind eyes, like Bear's eyes. She looked at the dog tags still clutched in her hand. He said these belonged to a good soldier, a soldier who loved the mountains and knew how to be quiet. He said the soldier would want someone brave to have them. The details were a series of impossible coincidences that tightened a knot of dread in Alicia's gut. David had been exceptionally tall. He had loved the mountains. And he had possessed a deep, quiet nature that she had often mistaken for shyness. After the rescue, the praise felt hollow, the handshakes and pats on the back like disconnected gestures from a world she no longer fully inhabited. She returned home and laid the dog tags on her simple wooden table. They seemed to absorb all the light in the room, a small metal black hole of questions. The next day, at the Pattersons' house, Lily's drawings provided more pieces to the impossible puzzle. She drew the tall man, always with a walking stick. David had injured his knee during basic training, an old injury that had flared up from time to time. She drew the man's shelter, a lean-to against a massive, distinctively shaped boulder. Alicia felt a jolt of recognition. It was Eagle Rock, a local landmark deep in the national forest, a place she and David had hiked to as teenagers. The investigation with Jack Reardon only solidified her growing, terrifying suspicion. When he called back with the news about Operation Silent Arrow and the ghost file, the world tilted. "Allie, listen to me," Jack had said, his voice a low growl of concern. If David somehow survived that ambush, he would have been carrying secrets that could topple governments. People would kill to find him, and people would kill to keep him hidden. You finding these tags is like setting off a flare in a very, very dark room. Someone saw it. Someone is coming. The arrival of Marcus Cole was the flare reaching its apex. His presence on her porch was the confirmation of a truth she had both desperately sought and deeply feared. Their conversation was a slow, painful extraction of a 10-year-old secret. Cole, it turned out, was a man living in his own prison of guilt and duty. He explained the impossible situation they had faced. David Rowe, the lone survivor, was a hero who could never be acknowledged, a living witness to a betrayal that would have had catastrophic consequences. We presented him with the options, Cole said, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains, as if seeing the peaks of Afghanistan instead of Washington state. He could be detained for national security, a comfortable prison, but a prison nonetheless. Or he could be given a new life, a ghost identity, and the resources to live it out in complete isolation. He chose the isolation. He chose to be close to you. The story was devastating, but it was the small details that broke Alicia's heart. Cole described David's life in the woods. He had refused most modern conveniences. He had spent his days hiking, reading, and watching the forest. He had asked Cole for only two things over the 10 years: a steady supply of books on history and philosophy, and any news, however small, about his sister. Cole would bring in newspaper clippings about Alicia's military career, and later, about her search and rescue work. "He was so proud of you, Alicia," Cole said, his voice thick. "He saw your work with the dogs, with finding lost people, as a kind of a redemption, a way of balancing the scales for what happened to his team. He couldn't come home, but he watched you bring others home. It was his only comfort." The image of her brother, living as a hermit just miles away, secretly following her life, was a fresh wave of grief. The anger she felt was not just at the government or the cover-up, but at the years, the conversations, the life they had lost. "Why now, Cole?" she demanded. "Why tell me now?" "Because he's gone," Cole said bluntly, finally meeting her eyes. "And because you found the tags. My orders were to maintain his cover at all costs. If he died, I was to remove all traces of his existence and let him fade away. But he made a choice in his final days. Giving the girl those tags, that was an act of rebellion. It was his final mission. To let you know the truth, my superiors consider this a catastrophic breach. They want me to clean it up. To convince you what the girl found was a coincidence, a set of lost tags. But I can't. I owed him better than that. I owe you better than that." He was confessing, not just to her, but to his own conscience. He was choosing a man's memory over a government secret. The walk to David's cabin was a pilgrimage. Cole led her up a barely there trail that wound deep into the forest, to the base of Eagle Rock. The lianta lily had drawn was there, and tucked behind it, almost invisible against the landscape, was a small, well-built cabin. It was a place built for hiding. The air inside was stale and cold, but it was clean, orderly. It smelled faintly of pine and old books. It was David. His presence was everywhere. In the worn copy of Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, on the bedside table. In the row of neatly stacked firewood. In the single, faded photograph on the wall, a picture of two smiling kids in their fishing gear, a much younger Alicia holding up a tiny trout, a teenage David laughing beside her. And then she saw the journal. Reading it was like listening to her brother's voice, a voice she thought she'd never hear again. She read about his initial months of rage and despair, a soldier trained for action, now condemned to utter silence. She read about how he slowly found a rhythm with the natural world, learning the names of the trees and the tracks of the animals. He wrote about the changing seasons, about the profound silence of a winter snowstorm. He wrote about her constantly. "Cole brought a paper today. Allie made sergeant. Knew she would. She was always tougher than me." Another entry. "Saw a picture of her with her new dog, Bear. He looks like Odin. Good. She needs a good partner. Someone to watch her six." It was a chronicle of a lost life, a decade of stolen time. The grief was a physical weight, pressing down on her, making it hard to breathe. But it was also a gift. It was the truth, in all its painful, heartbreaking detail. She and Cole chose a spot on the ridge behind the cabin for David's final resting place. As they worked, Cole spoke of his own relationship with David. "At first, I was just his handler," he said. "The enemy. But over the years, he became the only person I could be completely honest with. We were two ghosts, haunting the same forest." He confessed that David had saved him as much as he had saved David, pulling him back from the brink of his own cynicism. When it was done, Alicia stood before the simple, unmarked grave. She took the dog tags from around her neck. She held her own in one hand, and David's in the other. She spoke to the silent grave, her voice carried away by the wind. "I got your message, Davy," she whispered. "I'm sorry it took me so long. I'm sorry I wasn't here." She told him about her life, about Bear, about her promise to him on the lake. "I'm keeping my promise. I'm home. And now so are you." She didn't leave his tags there. She slipped the chain through both sets and fastened them back around her neck. They belonged together. The aftermath was quiet. Marcus Cole faded back into the shadows, his duty fulfilled. The government, it seemed, was content to let a sleeping ghost lie now that the secret was contained between the three of them. Alicia's life did not return to the way it was. The quiet was still there, but it was different. It was no longer the silence of avoidance, but the calm of acceptance. The hollow space inside her was filled. She poured her energy, her grief, her love for her brother, into her work. The Rowe Rescue Foundation became her new mission. With funding from a private, anonymous trust that Cole helped arrange reparations from a government that could never officially apologize, expanded her operations. She began training more dogs, pairing them with other veterans who, like her, were struggling to find their place in the civilian world. Each dog they trained, each person they found, was a tribute to David's memory. The final scene at the memorial dedication was not an ending, but a beginning. As she watched Lily Patterson, a happy, healthy 7-year-old now, laughing as she played with Bear, Alicia felt a sense of rightness settle deep in her bones. She had been searching for her brother for 10 years. But in the end, it was his ghost, his final, desperate message of love, that had led her out of her own wilderness and showed her the path home. The weight of the 2 sets of dog tags against her chest was no longer a burden. It was an anchor, grounding her in a new purpose, a promise to the brother she had lost and the lives she had yet to save.